Last week we were looking at Bauhaus modernism to postmodernism to modern design movements. The week before we were looking at Industrial Revolution to modernism, so that took in everything up to sort of Art Nouveau, Art Deco. This week we're going to be looking at specific designers. Now, some of the designers I find very inspirational I've already covered in the previous lectures. So Arne Jacobsen, for example, I've already said, hugely important to me as a designer, but we've already discussed him. So we're going to be going through other inspirational designers today, with a little more focus on their work rather than their context in a movement. We'll be traversing through today global designers. Next week we'll be focusing on British designers. I've updated this slightly to reflect, well, it may not seem like it, but I've tried to update this to reflect a slightly more diverse range of designers globally. And next week we'll be looking even, next week we'll have even more of those considerations in this. Obviously, in light of everything that's been going on over the last year, 2 years, in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of decolonizing design curriculums, we are looking at that in the department and how we do that. But there is, it's not really a dirty little secret that the fact is that design is very white and middle class and Eurocentric. So we will be looking at the more modern, especially British, because Britain's such a diverse country, designers who represent different ethnicities and different backgrounds. But what we're doing today is looking at a little bit more world focus, and even though I say that, it's still very Eurocentric and American focused. So bear that in mind. And if you want to make a comment about that, please do email me. I'm more than willing to discuss it. Okay, so we'll crack on. So this is just a few different images of different designers. You might recognize some of these pieces. In fact, let's see, does anyone recognize any of these pieces? There's at least one or two of them that should be recognized. Just some hands, just to see what you guys know about design. Yep, one person recognizes at least one of those five. 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. Loads of hands going up. Fantastic. So you guys have some knowledge of what design, sort of classic design pieces look like. Excellent. So going from left to right, it's Marianne Brandt, a Bauhaus designer, and then the Eameses. In the middle is a Joe Colombo piece. That's a Tejo Remy Dutch piece, and on the far right is a Philippe Starck piece as well. And we'll go through that in a bit more detail. Okay, let's crack on. We've got a lot to get through, and I've got a tendency to natter too much at the beginning, so let's go. We'll be looking at people from Bauhaus, Art Deco, Streamline, Moderne, late modernism, pop, and mainly postmodernism, because, you know, that's about 40 years worth of design and really what we're most interested in terms of modern culture. If you can just go ahead and lower your hands if you haven't already, please. So we're going to start off with Marianne Brandt. So Marianne Brandt was a really important designer and she actually was a real big presence in the Bauhaus's metal workshop. So we spoke about the Bauhaus. It was a hugely influential design school. And the metal workshop was really male-driven, male-dominated. Only 11 of 67 students were women, and she was the only one ever to receive a degree in metalwork from the Bauhaus. She ended up actually running the metal workshop after Laszlo Nagy left, who's a sculptor and designer from the Bauhaus. She's best known for her table clock for Ruppel, which is an iconic Bauhaus object. We'll have a look at that in a minute. And it really represents the Bauhaus's goal of uniting art and tech in design affordable to the broad public. She was also a photographer, made a series of photo montages. In fact, she was the first person ever to do photo montages, and was really exploring dynamism in modern life and media culture, depicting this idea of a new woman. So really important sort of, I don't think she'd have described herself as a feminist icon, because I don't think that kind of thinking existed at the time, but she was definitely, you know, a strong woman in a masculine-dominated area, in a masculine-dominated field. You know, metalwork inside design. So, you know, very admirable, amazing designer as well. So this is the clock on the left, the Ruppel clock that we were just mentioning earlier. Again, those rounded corners, the clarity of communication, a little bit of what's the right word to put? The aesthetic, the materiality. You know, the very high polished metalwork at the bottom. with this probably Bakelite rather than anything else, plastic top. And that sort of clock face looks so standard to us nowadays, but thinking about 1932, Art Deco, Art Nouveau, most clocks would have probably had Roman numerals, all very fancy filigree. So, you know, very low tech, high communication, able to be afforded by many people, very simple. And the same with the ceiling lamp on the right, 1925 again, obviously pulling on her experience in metal work there, but just very simple, very affordable, using industrial processes to manufacture it. I really love this teapot on the left. I think there's some clear Christopher Dresser influence in there, if you remember from last week, Christopher Dresser. And this is a prototype. It was never actually manufactured. Just a beautiful piece of work, just in terms of form, proportions, detailing. I mean, that handle detail with the hinges for the handle, the way that the so I'm not 100% sure if that's some sort of Bakelite plastic or ebony, but the way that kind of blends into that semicircular. And if you find images of this teapot, you can just see how wonderful the form, proportion, visual balance is. It's really masterful, actually. And then on the right, again, just looks like a standard, you know, cheapo bedside table lamp you could get now, what, nearly 100 years later. So it's really timeless, that piece of design. Again, very simple. Again, using her knowledge in metalwork to apply that to industrial processes to develop something that could be afforded for everyone. So there's that sort of idealistic, utopian part of Bauhaus happening there. And these are a couple of her photo montages. Again, you know, photography in 1926 wasn't a new technology, but it was definitely burgeoning. You know, photography had been around for probably 50 years in different forms by that point. But taking those photos, cutting them up, collaging them, that's a pretty amazing technique actually at that point in time. And you can see what she's trying to do with these. She's kind of getting these impressions, as kind of obviously said in this image on the right, Parisian impressions, so different parts of her experiences in Paris and how they kind of built up to her entire impression of the city. And again, the unnervingness of the city on the left, these large scale elements, technology, cars, skyscrapers, planes, all of that coming together. Really interesting. So yeah, an innovator, a real innovator, Marianne Brandt. I want to just quickly discuss Walter Gropius with you guys. Walter Gropius is the founder and builder of the Bauhaus. Well, yeah, exactly. Physical Photoshop. It's how everything used to be done. One of the most important design thinkers in the 20th century. He couldn't actually draw, so pretty amazing actually. It said he couldn't actually draw. Whether he couldn't actually draw or not is moot. I don't think he was a very good draftsman, is probably the better way of putting it. Yep, but he was an ideas man and a collaborator, so it didn't matter. And that idea of collaboration became an underlying principle of the Bauhaus. So it combines all of these different areas of arts, architecture, craft to make these complete works of art. So it's not really about his design work that I'm interested in or trying to get you guys to understand. I just want you to know of him. He actually dropped out of college, not advocating that at all, obviously, but he dropped out of college using a little bit of nepotism to join a architecture office, and he left in 1910 to establish his own office with a couple of other colleagues. And during that point, he worked with Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe as well, who you may remember from our conversations last week. Now, again, not really interested in his work too much, but I just wanted to show you this. This is his first important work, 1913. And again, remember, Art Deco was just really only a twinkle in design's eye at that point, but that is super deco. Those crystal windows, this kind of stepping, especially these front steps, right? Shoe factory, by the way. Really important piece of architecture. And then in 1914, at the Werkbund exhibition, which was another World Fair kind of deal, I think it was in Cologne, he did this. It's hard to get nice photos of this, to be honest, so apologies. This sort of model factory. And you can see on the far left, that's the detail on the far right of this slide. Again, very deco-y. This part on the first photo on the left, there's these curved glass elements with staircases going up them. And on the right photo, this big glass panel in the brickwork wall to allow more light in. I think, you know, very futuristic for the time, even though now it feels quite dated, obviously. Now, the next slide is kind of just a fun thing. We always talk about how the Bauhaus are serious and take themselves far too seriously. This is one of the Bauhaus's costume parties. And some argue that the Bauhaus was actually the beginning of performance art as well. So there's a lot of performance art elements in these kind of really out there costumes. So it wasn't all serious, boring, some people think, ideas. It was a lot of fun going on as well, and lots of creativity. And this thing on the right, I don't know how much you're into performance art, but it's very Lee Bowery and very David Bowie as well. Okay. So Charles and Ray Eames. Let's see a quick show of hands. Who's heard of the Eameses? Sweet. Great. Quite a few of you. That's great news. So they're really, really amazing husband and wife design team. They had groundbreaking contributions to architecture, furniture, industrial design, manufacturing as well. They applied, like a lot of really important designers, they applied industrial, or not quite industrial, they applied unusual manufacturing techniques. So we were talking about how STREAMLINE Moderne are applying plane making techniques to caravans. Well, they did the same. They were applying plywood molding, which was mainly used in planes, to furniture. So molded plywood, fiber reinforced plastic, which at the time was absolutely, you know, space age before space age, bent metal wire and aluminium. So you could give consumers these beautiful, functional and very inexpensive products by applying this technology in manufacturing processes. They were equal partners, and they were always considered themselves equal partners as well. In fact, Charles said Ray, anything that he could do, Ray could do better. So he was actually the less equal partner in that. And this was at a time where most women were sort of wives or secretaries and dismissed. So Ray, her real name was, what was her real name? It wasn't Ray. It was like Berta or something. So she was actually frequently forgotten. She had a background in textile, but that sort of background gave her a really sharp eye for detail and a sense of color and fun, and kind of, he was quite austere in his design. So the two of them together were a really great team. So, you know, she was equally, if not more important to their success. Bernice, that's it, thank you. What did I say? Berta. I was almost there. It's been a long time since I read about their names. not bad off the top of my head. So on the left, 1945, 1946. Again, you know, that's pretty amazing bent ply pieces. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can I count? No, I can't count. 5 pieces of bent ply to make a chair. Pretty amazing. And then the wire chair on the right is still a design classic. I think that sort of beautiful structural element of the base, you know, it's almost like a suspension bridge, or you know, just very bare minimum, lots of lightness, lots of lack of weight. And that's an upholstered version. They're not all upholstered like that. 1951. Okay, so remember, at the same time, STREAMLINE Moderne is happening. Harley Earl is banging on about all his fins and making kids whistle, and they're doing something completely different and really embracing these new technologies. You know, they're not making pencil sharpeners that are streamlined, which is pretty contemporary for this, actually, maybe a few years earlier. Not to slag off Raymond Loewy, obviously. This piece, the hockey puck thing on the left. On this one, the joining connection. Yeah, I'm not sure what that's made of. I'd have to look into that. It's obviously some sort of angle setter to allow the seat to be raised. I don't know why they wouldn't have just used an extra little piece of ply, but I imagine that's just for production techniques. This is probably a modern repro version, so they've updated that with a piece of plastic. There might have been a piece of metal work in there. Yeah, may well be rubber. But as I say, this is the repro version, so there might have been some tweaks to it. Reproduction, by the way. Eames lounge chair. I think everyone knows what this is. It's one of the most iconic pieces of furniture, as is the one on the right here. And obviously this piece on the right is that glass reinforced plastic, this shell. And again, 1950, massively innovative use of technology. Really interesting, both of these are using shells in some way. One's veneered ply, one's plastics. So this elephant toy on the left was a prototype they made, but is now being manufactured. And really interesting use here. In fact, this compound curving, so you've got curves going in two different directions, is really hard to achieve in ply. So it's a really cool little toy. And here's just an example of her of Ray's textile work, a circles pattern on the right, and again in 46. You know, nothing massively poppy, right? But really subtle, really that attention to detail, really lovely. Great bit of textile work. Again, not a textile designer. Dieter Rams, okay, one of the most important designers of all time. Like literally super important. His impact is being felt for 20, 30 years in industrial design. So we've looked at a bit, some designers who are focused more on furniture. And to be honest with you, we'll be looking quite a lot at furniture because that's my background. We'll also be looking at industrial design on sort of appliances and whatnot. But this is particularly important to industrial design. He became really closely associated with Braun. He was head of design for over 30 years at Braun, the German design company, or electronics company, I should say. He also worked at Witzo, or for Witzo, which is a furniture brand. So very functionalist, very, very unobtrusive, very less is better, less is more. You might recognize that. And that means his products are kind of timeless and really inspirational for Johnny Ive as well. We'll have a quick look at something about that later. You all know Johnny Ive from Apple, obviously, or who was at Apple. And he had 10 rules, which I would suggest you try and remember. Hint, hint. So good design is innovative, makes products useful, is aesthetic, makes a product understandable, is unobtrusive, is honest, is long-lasting, is thorough down to the last detail, it's environmentally friendly, right? Saying that in the 60s, and is as little design as possible. Okay. I wouldn't argue with any of those, to be honest. I think that's a pretty good list. He actually goes into a lot more detail than those headlines. And I think, you know, everything we do as designers should strive to remember some of those elements at least. Of course, there are postmodern works that would say design doesn't have to be honest or even unobtrusive. So very functionalist and still modernist approach, I would say, even though he was kind of post-typical modernist, even though he wasn't postmodern, obviously. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to check the chat. There's a few questions. Yeah, okay, nothing at the moment. So Dieter Rams, let's look at some of his work. You'll recognize some of these pieces because we've drawn some of them. The record player on the left in 1960 starts to kind of establish this Braun style, very simple planes, simple colors, simple forms. And again, kind of very innovative at the time, 1960, considering what else was out there. So yeah, making these objects affordable to everyone. 1960, post-war, the beginning of disposable income and teenagers. I mean, they probably wouldn't have been able to afford this, but this one on the right, I think, is definitely trying to lean into that lifestyle, a little portable radio with a phono connector on there so it can actually play a record directly on this little portable thing. 1959, a portable record player. Pretty innovative. I think what's really interesting about this is it's also got this odd blend, which you wouldn't see so much today, except in the luxury market, of plastics, metals, sure, and leather. Yeah. Yeah. Don't know how good the sound quality is. Nope. Can play a record as well. Some of them can. Some of them are only radios. There's different models. And they're 45s, not LPs. So they're not 33s. So they're only singles. It's in the body of the machine. So from the 1950s, 60s to the 1970s, the one on the right, the Arrow Master, I'm sure some of you guys recognize just from general culture, possibly anyway. Simple forms, honest, unobtrusive, thorough down to the last detail, all of these things really embodied in this. And then when you start developing these really complex technical objects like a home movie camera or a Super 8 camera, how do you do these things when you've got to communicate all of these complexities? I don't know if I can zoom in on this. Hold on, let's see if I can. Oh, sweet. I mean, look at all of this information you've got to get across. Just very, very clear fonts, very simple indicators, different speed stops, all of this kind of stuff. Just really communicated clearly. Beautiful use of different materials. Consideration of grip points, rubberized elements. You know, just really well thought out. These pieces, 1969, the KMM2 coffee grinder. I think that doesn't look out of place in a modern kitchen, personally. I think that would look great, and you know, I'm considering getting one for myself actually, because my coffee grinder is really ugly comparatively. It's amazing. It's 40 years later, and my coffee grinder's, yeah, really, really hideous comparatively. It's got all these horrible extraneous swoops and over-the-top nonsense. So I think just a great piece of design again. Very simple. And again, look, just how indicating things, different color palettes, and different indicator colors, but consistency throughout. I mean, obviously didn't want to put a black switch there, so they used a white one, probably because they've got a white one there. Oh, they've kept those two similar as well. You see what I mean? It's kind of this attention to detail, really important. Thorough down to the last detail. And this is some of his furniture work, Universal Shelving System 606 for Vitso. Basically, these spurs go on the wall. You can move all of these parts up and down. You can arrange it however you want, etc., etc. And then this chair system again is kind of like an expandable chair system. You can take the side panels off, put more chairs together. This is one version with a swivel base. I'm not personally a fan of this chair. I think it's hideous, but whatever. Each to their own. I think it's just a box. And you know, we've looked at some box chairs before, but this is seriously just a box. I really dislike this side panel element, but I think that's necessary because of the sort of flexibility of the system itself. Okay, and I said we were going to look at how he's influenced Apple. I mean, come on. You could say influenced, you could say Johnny Ive was heavily influenced, or you could say he just kind of ripped him off and changed it just enough that it was different. You could say both of those things. I'm not going to say which one I think. I think he was really, well, I am. I think he was really heavily influenced, and I think saying he ripped him off was probably a little bit harsh. But I mean, just look. I don't think there's anything I need to say about this. And I think this is only 4 out of more examples you could find as well. So yeah, Dieter Rams, Braun design, massively important. For Charlotte Perriand, another really important female designer, really, really influential on our modern lives and on the idea of interior composition and sensitivity to everyday life. So at a time, she was a contemporary and worked with Le Corbusier. So at a time when there's all this idea of rationality, the house is a machine for living in, if only we apply industrial techniques to the home, everyone will have perfect lives. She was a little bit more sensitive towards that and didn't necessarily agree with that. But she did have, at the age of 24, a decade-long collaboration with Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret. And Le Corbusier's real name was Charles Jeanneret, I believe, and Pierre is his cousin. So Le Corbusier, his cousin, and her worked together. And her involvement's really clear in the work of that 10 years through the way that they apply materials in a much more sensitive way than Le Corbusier tends to in his architecture. She also had these experiences in the Far East between 40 and 46 where she was very heavily influenced by materials and style of the time, just like Dresser, if you remember, was influenced by his visits to Japan through the British Council, or what was the equivalent of the British Council in the 1880s, but I'm just kind of spitballing that. I can't quite remember the dates. And you can see that in his work. She also had a lot of influence from Japanese Far Eastern design. It's not just Japan in her travels. So she started experimenting with bamboo, for example, to replace steel tubing. And in her work, she worked for people like Air France and Cassina, which is a very high-end Italian design firm, or furniture firm, I should say. So the Petalo or Petalo, I'm not sure the pronunciation for Cassina, and again, Cassina could be either way. Again, not sure of the pronunciation. I think 1951, really, really sort of colourful, poppy for 1951. I don't mean pop art, but kind of just like pops. Really simple. 5 exactly the same, scaled up, scaled down versions. Simple trussing, tubular steel, painted black around the outside, with these elements just sat in this sort of framework. all kind of spin into each other. So you've got your 5 tables. And I just think this idea of them being petals, which is obvious from the name itself, is just a really nice idea. And also kind of contribute to that unfolding swirl. And then, of course, everyone goes, oh, these pieces are Le Corbusier. Actually, they're Le Corbusier and Charlotte Perriand and Pierre Jeanneret. So Le Corbusier gets a lot of credit for these. And I think even on the sheet which I gave out, because this is one we've looked at before, this one on the right. Sorry, these fonts are driving me mad. This is not the correct font. Yeah, so she was massively influential, and these pieces aren't just Le Corbusier. Okay. These are obviously very modernist. But then you move on to some of her more individual work, and again, there's that sensitivity to everyday life, that sort of influence from her travels in the Far East. I mean, this is 1940, so this is the beginning of the work. But if you know the LC1 Chaise Lounge, I think it's the LC1 Chaise, Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret and her Chaise Lounge, this is pretty much the same form, but done in a way that is an outdoor lounger made of timber. So that sort of, and especially with this framing, almost the paper wall, I can't remember what they're called in the background, it's got this very Far Eastern, Oriental feel to it. And then on the right, this sort of shelving unit, which is again a bit like the Vitso one we looked at earlier. You can move elements around using aluminium in places, so getting a bit more adventurous with materials. Not personally a fan of the color choices, or even the base, but you know, important piece of work from an important designer. Right, I'm going to keep going. Joe Colombo. I really like Joe Colombo's work, especially when I was younger. A bit less now, to be honest. Joe Colombo was an Italian industrial designer, and he tried to strive for making people's lives better after the war, basically. So in the late 60s, he designed for companies like Cartel, Zanotta, Olucci, Boffi, and Alessi, all Italian companies, which is my inflection got a little bit over the top towards the end. He felt that design was a way to make human life more comfortable and enjoyable. You can see there's this real utopian thing going on with all of these designers, trying to make the world a better place, that cliche before it was a cliche. So he developed modular furniture a lot of the time, very space-agey feel, using shapes and concepts and materials with this sort of futurist, optimistic feeling. He died on his birthday at the age of 41, which is no age at all. Really no age. It's nutty how much he did in such a short time. So this is one of his most famous pieces, Tube Chair for Capellini. Each of these pieces actually fits inside each of them, so they all stack up into this one tube element. So this obviously goes in this goes in this, and they all kind of like Russian nesting dolls go together. And also these little clips, just connect them all. So you can rearrange this into any configuration you want, which is quite a neat idea. Not sure how comfortable it is, but again, thinking about what furniture is or was in 1969 and the formality and the rules of furniture and how he's breaking them so much. Cartel coffee lamp on the left, just very space agey. It's got these little elements in there, what would you call them? Cutouts, sculpts. So you can put things in your bedside table lamp. I mean, that's just 1960s all over, really. That for me. And then on the right, a piece for Luce, the globe lamp, Globe 827 in '64. Just wanted to show you the difference between those two different styles. So he was able to change his style. The one on the right is much more elegant and refined, and I'd rather have that than the one on the left. I think that one on the left has aged quite poorly, personally, but you know, there's people out there who would love that. Again, design's very subjective, isn't it? And then the Joe Glove armchair, not named after himself, but after, oh God, some baseball player called Joe. I can't remember. Apologies. I was reading up on this yesterday to make sure I knew it, and I've forgotten it. Personally, again, it's kind of like a funny joke, and then the punchline gets worse every time you look at it. But you know, each to their own. And then on the right, dinner serving tray for Alitalia. Again, in the 1970s, air travel was picking up in a very commercial way. 1960s, 70s, people going on holiday. How do you give them an experience on a plane? Considering you've got these sharp-edged plates, trays, make these ceramics with flat edges so it all nests neatly together. Lightweight, flat, all of these considerations. So you can see lighting, furniture, consumer products in a very specific context of an aeroplane. Harry Bertoia, you guys will recognize his work. We're only going to look at one of his ranges because that's really the most important thing he did. He worked a little bit with the Eameses. Oh, typo, I will go and correct that, don't worry. That's what we'll do after this lecture, apologies. So he met Walter Gropius when he was studying, and then he helped the Eameses after the war with their bent plywood work. And he was kind of a lecturer in sculpture, sculptor, and furniture designer. The first two, I think, more important to him. And he was also a sound sculptor when that was a completely new thing. His most important work was these 5 iconic welded wire chairs, which is the BERTOIA collection for Knoll in 1952. And we'll have a look at those. And he said, if you look at these chairs, they're mainly made of air. Like sculpture, space passes right through them. Yeah, you'll recognize some of these. The diamond chair is the one on the far right, by the way. These have all got different names. The one in the middle is the bird chair, and I can't remember the other ones, to be honest with you. They're all part of the BERTOIA collection. And there is a similarity there between, if we just, I'll see how long this will take, bear with me. Quick. Come on. Yep, no, there we go. So there is a similarity between this wire chair on the right in 1951. Let's carry on. Try and remember what that looks like. Yeah, nearly there. And this one. But I think these are just done so much nicer. And I particularly like this one on the right because of the sort of the sculpted form. The way that those edges turn into the armrests as well. Beautiful. Okay. We're moving into a more modern area now. So Karim Rashid, hopefully you guys have heard of Karim Rashid, Egyptian-born Canadian designer, works for all of these different companies, high-tech products, surface design, brand identity, packaging, and his work is featured in 20 permanent museum collections. So what's interesting is design starts to become art in postmodern times. So if you just look at the beginning, I'm not going to flip all the way back, but if you look at the second slide again, you can see this is moving into postmodern times, okay? So before it was more modern, this is postmodern, except for Colombo, who's pop, and BERTOIA, who's technically pop. But anyway, he states, and this doesn't mean it's true, or, you know, he says that design is about the betterment of our lives poetically, aesthetically, experientially, sensorially, and emotionally. And he says he's an eclectic, optimistic, and great supporter of democratic design. Now, he says those things, so, you know, that's his opinion, fine. But he also, that's his opinion on himself, that he's eclectic, optimistic, and a great supporter of democratic design. Now, I've got some problems with the way he designs and some of his design work and his self-image, but his work is actually pretty impressive. Yep, precisely. Just like Philippe Starck, who I will also discuss in a second. So I think this is a great idea. I think this is an ugly piece of furniture, and I think it's terrible use of plastic. But I think it's a smart idea where you can kind of get these two elements on this wire frame, sorry, on this tubular frame, and mix and match all these plastic parts to develop your own chair. For a company called FEC, which is an odd name, but there you go. Cool design, neat idea. He's very poppy. Karim Rashid, very poppy, loves bright colours, loves clashing colours. Yeah, not my bag personally, but you know, whatever. Doesn't have to be everyone's style. Made this self-heating baby bottle for Iamo in 2009, which is a neat idea. Again, this kind of very biomorphic, sculpted, blobby form. I think that's what people would level at him. He's a very blobby designer. But obviously, you know, he or his team are technically able, because this, I was reading some reviews of it yesterday actually, because I was interested in seeing how well it worked. Meh was the general consensus online. And then obviously on the left, the bubble bottle, everyone knows that's the filtering bottle. I mean, it's just ubiquitous, right? Actually, a really nice balanced form, feels great in the hand. Simple idea, well done. That's, I think, one of his really good successes. And this vodka bottle on the right, I think, is a really good piece of branding. Really interesting use of glass work. And just interesting to see those two different bottle forms side by side, I thought, anyway. So he's obviously, just sorry to go back, obviously doesn't have a particular style, maybe, like I said, a bit blobby, but his work is based on his client a bit more. There is, yeah, exactly. There is tons of his work out there, and applies to every single designer we're looking at. We are doing a very quick overview of their work. And if any of these people are interesting to you, I would really advocate that you go and take a book out from the library or go online and read their, start off by reading their Wikipedia page and then follow the links at the bottom of that. Obviously, when I was at school, I was told Wikipedia is a rubbish resource. It's become one of the more reliable things online, but don't use it as the end. Start with it and then read all the resources under it. There's also MoMA websites, Tate Britain websites, loads of great resources. But if you're researching into these people and you like their work, try and go to reputable sources, obviously. So another one who's a bit of a marketer, Philippe Starck, massively famous when I was a student. I've got a book on him somewhere. Is it in here? If not to hand. Oh, I don't have it. I really liked his work when I was growing up. I thought he had a great sense of humour. Works across interiors, boats, watches, houses, products. He started off being really famous for his interiors work in the 1980s. I think he did the Palace of Versailles renovation. And as any good designer should do, he addressed the needs of clients when he moved into industrial design rather than focusing on a style. However, he's often got a lot of fluidity in his design, but really focuses on his sense of humour. And like any sense of humour, it's touch and go whether you find it funny. But the idea is that by having this sense of humour, you improve people's lives by making them laugh. He was a star designer in the 1990s, and he often featured in his own ads as a selling point. And again, he says he's flamboyant and light-hearted like his work. I think he's overrated and dated like his work now, personally. But as I said, I thought he was great when I was your age. And I think, over the last, 20 years since then, my personal opinion is not the truth, by the way. That's my personal opinion. You might disagree entirely. So obviously, the arrow on the left looks a bit like a ram's horn, 1988 for Floss. All of these names, by the way, all of these companies are massively important design companies that you should know or start to know. Tusi Salif, we've already discussed. I think a great piece of design in terms of form development and sculpture. I think a terrible piece of design in functionality. We've discussed this before, but let's not get into it again. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's some streamlined moderne in there. Yeah, completely. This Dr. Skull on the right, I think I really liked it. In 1998, it came out, so I'd have been 15 then. And that's recorded, so everyone can always know my age from this point on. It's a fly swatter. So it's actually a rubbish fly swatter. Yeah, exactly, Ibrahim. It's actually really bad because if you look at it, you can see it's got a lot more thickness at the bottom of that stem and it gets quite thin up at the top. So as a fly swatter, pretty bad. Obviously, you're holding the bottom of it, it kind of flaps around, it'll start to break there. As a design or art piece, yeah, that too, Phoebe. And to be honest, I don't really want to display the splushed remains of bugs on a fly swatter, personally. So this is what I mean. It's a good sense of humour, but in terms of function, yeah. But the thing about this is, using these perforations to create an image. And again, this kind of seems like, yeah, so what nowadays? But again, 20 odd years ago, pretty cool idea. Yeah. So I think that's quite a nice thing. And again, Alessi, you know what they're like. Again, Alessi, hot Berta kettle on the left. You remember last week we looked at Michael Graves and he had done the, I can't remember the official title. It's the bird kettle, right? The one with the bird on the end. So this is part of that sort of 1980s Alessi postmodern nonsense, to be honest. Not my style. How would you even hold that or fill it up or use it or anything? How is it kettle? It's yeah, beautiful piece of composition though. The way that yeah, exactly. It's again yesterday I was just double checking some of these things and I was looking into how you hold it. Yeah, it is a stove heated kettle, exactly. And it's pretty difficult. But again, as a piece of sculpture, as a piece of statement, as a sense of humor, as a self-promotional tool, Philippe Starck nailed it. In the middle, this is a television. Believe it or not, all of that backspace behind it is part of the TV. I know I'm sounding patronizing. It's on purpose. I'm sure you know what old TVs used to look like. Cathode ray tube TVs, right? And at the time, 94, generally plastic surrounds, lots of plastic, lots of vent space. So he decided to try and do this thing for Saba, where you use compressed wood chippings to make that form. So actually, quite an interesting piece for the time, 94, leaning a little bit into sustainability, environmentally sensitive design, but really not because of the amount of heavy metals and everything in there. Yeah, I mean, it would be, but I mean, that is probably less than 20% of the entire telly. So we're looking at that side of self-promotion thing again, aren't we? Or are we? I don't know. Bear with me 1 second. And then the Ghost Chair, 2002. Obviously, I mean, it's kind of obvious by the title, but can someone tell me what that's based on? The form of it, I should say. No one know anything about design history before the Industrial Revolution then? Louis XIV style furniture. Do I have a book here about that? Not to hand, again, apologies. If you're interested, I can find something and ping you an image. Very traditional French style of furniture, right? That sort of medallion back and those arms. Very, very sort of, not Baroque, more Rococo-ish style. It would usually be very sculpted, lots of gold on it. But what he did was take that archetypal, platonic form, and we're getting into kind of design theory and arty-fartiness a little bit there, and strip it back down to its bare minimums, make it out of transparent plastic. In the noughties, this was like everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and then it's kind of disappeared because, no pun intended, because actually the plastic used, not very long lasting, to be honest, lots of weak points in the design of it, but you know, very iconic piece. Oh my God, I've kept talking for so long. Okay, and then in the 2000s, just went to crap, basically, in my opinion. I mean, what is this nonsense? It's just garbage. Again, please feel free to disagree with me. The gun lamp of Floss is about violence and blah blah blah. No, it's about selling it to Colombian drug lords, in my opinion. I don't know what that design's all about. It's awful. Yeah, gold plated. Yeah, I suppose spies. Listen, and as I keep saying, this is just my opinion. I don't think I'm right about anything. Well, I do think I'm right, but I don't think I'm. Uh, my opinion is the only one that's valid, except when it comes to these gnomes tools, which is just ridiculously ugly. Patricia URQUIOLA, Spanish designer and architect, eclectic, experimental, and works for different design houses, so Cartel Foscarini, Casina, Moroso. Modern style, feminine accents, unexpected elements, lots of design awards, and art director of Casina in 2000, from 2005. Again, a little correction that needs to be made to that. Apologies. So in 2002, this Fjord chair was made for Moroso. I think just beautifully sculpted, lovely leather work, lovely attention to detail of how these sort of contours form almost like a topography. The antibody chaise lounge, these little elements open and close up. It comes in a different range of colors. These are all textile, so you can make it less or more colorful. Beautiful, beautiful piece of work. I think the chasen lamp, which is based on the Japanese tea ceremony, has a little whisk called chasen, and it's made out of strips of bamboo, which look exactly like that. But just like this way, the light is diffused, but also hidden. Chef kiss. Lovely stuff. And I really like this Serena table lamp on the right. I just think it's very simple, but the idea of using this reflective panel, it's just really nice. I think she's a great designer, really great designer, and much more interested in the design work than her own self-image. This was made for Mabio furniture than a lady's side table, and there are versions of this where there are star patterns upholstered into the top of it. I just thought a really neat idea of having this A-frame as your stand, but also as your carry case as well, so you can move it around quite easily. We're going to move on to Konstantin GRCIC, whose name I can never pronounce. If there's anyone out there who can pronounce it better than me and knows how to pronounce it, please do tell me. He's a German industrial designer, known for pared down aesthetics, geometric shapes, and unexpected angles. Been working on his own studio since 1991. He started the RCA in London and has worked for furniture, products, exhibitions, architecture, lighting, for companies like all of these ones. I mean, you can pick out the ones you know: Cassina, Floss, Gallery Creo, and again, this is getting into that design art world. Muji, Nespresso, even Smart, Vitra, who you guys should know, we've mentioned more than once in the last 3 or 4 lectures. He describes his work, and again, this is how he describes his own work. So this is straight from his mouth, and whether you agree with it or not is up to you. I disagree with what Rashid said about his work, but I think Konstantin GRCIC is a little bit more honest, in my opinion. He says his work is functional in human terms, combining formal strictness with mental acuity and humor, characterized by research into the history of art, design and architecture, and passion for technology and materials. I don't find his work humorous at all. I think it's quite serious and down the line. So again, you might recognize this piece. We've got you guys to draw this, I think, in one of our earlier sessions. It's the Mayday lamp. Neat idea. You can take the lamp around with you. It's kind of following on from that Memphis idea of the pushing, what's it called, the super lamp, you know, portable lamp, but you can wrap the wire around it. And obviously the diffuser is a cone of light. So it's kind of a physical representation of the light itself. We looked at these last week as well, the chair 1 swivel and the chair 1, very CAD based. We were discussing how this is part of the deconstructivist movement. And obviously 2004 was not the beginning of CAD, but it's when CAD really started to get used much, much more intensively in industry. I think it was Rhino 1 or 2 I got taught in 2003. So Rhino moves on very slowly as well. So we're on 6 or 7 now. So obviously you can see how this is all the surfaces, all the ways those surfaces are made. The Mito stacking chair, I think, is just a really simple cantilever chair, one single piece of injection molded plastic, stacks up in this quite neat, beautiful, actually, organizational way. Just really neat. I think great bit of industrial design. And then Mark NEWSON. I'm just rattling through some of these because I know we've got a little bit less time than I would have liked. I'm going to carry on till the end. We've still got another 16 odd slides. It's 2 or 3 designers and a few odds and sods to get through, so stick with me, guys. I'll keep going. If you can't stick with me, it'll still be recording. Mark NEWSON is an Australian industrial designer based in London now, and he works across product, furniture, jewellery, automotive, clothing, known for smooth geometry, absence of sharp lines. Some may say he's also quite a blobby designer, but I don't think that's fair, to be honest. So he thinks about design as this experimental exercise in structure and technology with this idea of tactility and exploration of materials, processes, and skills. Excuse me 1 second. He became really well known for a piece called the LOCKHEED Lounge, which made his name as a designer. It was the first piece he did out of college. And it sold for 96.8, that's not how you say it, that amount of dollars at Sotheby's in 2006 and 1.1 mil pounds in 2009 at Phillips de Poury. So again, we've been mentioning this again and again as we've been talking through sort of the 80s onwards, the idea of design as art. I would say probably started with Memphis, but we'll get into that in even more detail in a second. He's worked at Apple since 2014, and since Johnny Ive left Apple, he set up an independent design firm with him. We'll be looking at Johnny Ive a little bit next week, by the way, because he's a British designer and this is global design, even if they're based in London. So this is a LOCKHEED lounge chair. LOCKHEED is obviously an aeronautic company. This is quite clearly based on sort of sculptural aeronautical forms. A bit of STREAMLINE moderne in there, perhaps. This became really famous when Madonna featured it in one of her videos. I can't remember which video it was. I used to have a slide where I had a picture of her lounging about in it and asked the students if they knew who she was, but it became more and more depressing every year. The fewer and fewer people knew who she was. So I've stopped doing that. Ned, I agree with you. I think it's a beautiful piece of sculpture. Whether it's a piece of design is a different matter, but it's a beautiful piece of sculpture. Okay, and this is where things get interesting for me in terms of design. Personally, I'm really into art design, that kind of vibe. as well as industrial design, obviously. That's where I managed to pay my bills, but this is kind of an interesting area for me. The embryo chair, really complex manufacturing techniques, injection foam around a metal form. Okay, this embryo chair in 1998, and also this kind of floating connection where the front legs perforate it. Oh, I've got no doubt it's uncomfortable to sit in. But that's a production piece. But on the right is an orgone chair. What I love about this piece, yeah, I'd never seen that before. Definitely nostrily. This one on the right, again, 1993. Only 6 made, plus 2 artist proofs, plus 1 prototype as well. There's only 9 of these in the world. They're 6-figure sums to buy them. Really beautiful form, really beautiful contrast of color on the interior exterior. I think we'll look at Ron Arad next week as well, in that sort of vein. Interiority, exteriority of materials. They're kind of got parallel in their work. Anyway, let's crack on. But also, 1999, working on concept cars for Ford. I think whether or not he did it intentionally, this is quite an inclusive car design. Not necessarily the most beautiful concept car, but in terms of the fact that the boot kind of slides out like a drawer, and there's no central pillar, getting away from safety concerns, but there's no central pillar so that car seat can swivel. In terms of an aging population, I think both of those considerations are really good innovation into car design. Don't think they ever got taken up for probably safety reasons, because the central pillar is quite an important safety feature. So you can see high-end furniture, 6 ever made, concept cars for like industrial applications, business suites for the A330 for Qantas, A380 trays, so just like Joe Colombo, quite high-end conceptual weird stuff, but then quite pared back, quite experience focused, quite quality focused, industrially produced pieces. And there's also other crockery associated with this that I haven't shown, that is really beautifully made, or beautifully designed, I should say. And these business suites, just really nicely thought out. He did another project in 2008 about full-length lying down on Qantas, but this is the updated version on 2014. I just want to show you like the range this guy has, and this is only a few things. And more industrially focused, Sunbeam, Australian brand, kettle and toaster. I mean, it's a kettle and toaster, right? But it's actually really nicely designed, really nice considerations, good form, nice color. Just like, well, maybe. The one on the left has got a little more subtlety in the color. The one on the right has got a bit more overt color. And then the top piece is the metal rather than the opposite, the inversion on the left. But I think compared to the Hot Bertha, obviously a lot more functional, but it's obviously supposed to be a lot more functional than the Hot Bertha. So, yeah, it's a nice kettle and toaster, right? What do you want? Anyway, we're going to move on to DROOG, or DROOG, I think is how you pronounce it. If there's any Dutch speakers, correct me. Collective of designers, founded in 1993 by Gies Bakker and Rennie Ramakers, not Rennie. After the excess of the greed is good era in the 1980s, designers turned to a new value system based on economy, simplicity, and responsibility, and being broke students, I imagine, as well, quite a few of them. So they celebrate this ingenuity and poverty of means and make it much more this aesthetic. People involved include Marcel Wanders, Tejo Remy, Jürgen Bay, Helle Jongerius, Richard Hutton, Joris Laarman, who's a more recent addition. And they focus on conceptual design work, the use of everyday recycled or reappropriated materials, and down-to-earth mentality. And again, this kind of ties in with what we were discussing earlier, this movement from design as industrial to more of a art practice. Now, I know that you guys are here to learn how to be industrial designers, so I don't want to focus too much on this, but this is just to make you understand that there's a gamut of design, right? Okay, we're not artists, we're designers, but we can have some sort of artistic elements in our more bonkers work, perhaps. And this is a good example of that. So, a series of drawers found on the streets, plywood boxes made up for them, and a ratchet strap slapped around them. You can't lay down your memory, says Tejo Remy. And then on the right, the rag chair. Old clothes, old rags, made into the form of a chair, strapped together with ratchet straps. Actually, sorry, packaging straps like you use for palleting, or palletizing. Is that design? Is it art? Let's not answer that. That's a whole question that we're not going to get into right now, I'm afraid. You don't have to think anything at the moment. None of the above. Hard work, but why? Why not? I agree. I don't know what to think about some of these times. That photo has come out terribly. Again, in the mid 90s, when I was growing up, this was massively influential for me. I really like the idea of, changing the concept of what design is and kind of being poetic in inverted commas. But that is when you're at the end of your degree and know how to be an industrial designer. Okay, you need to know the basics before you get to this point, in my opinion. We've got the left, this chandelier by Rodi Graumans, taking the idea of what a chandelier is and changing it entirely. Why does a chandelier have to have all these fixings? Why can't it just be 85 simple connections? 1995, right? You can't get away with that now. You could get away with it then. This bottoms up doorbell, unfortunately, is very pixely, but it basically is arguing, why does a doorbell look like a doorbell when a doorbell doesn't tell you what its form is? Yeah, you're probably right, Phoebe. It probably does give a lot of heat off. On the right, so basically 2 wine glasses and the doorbell motor inside it. So it rings these 2 wine glasses instead of a doorbell. So the tree trunk bench by Jürgen Bay. Well, if you make furniture out of wood, why do we even make furniture? If you can just sit on a tree bench, let's get some old chair backs and just drill it in there. Jürgen Bay is an awesome designer. Beyond this, by the way, industrial designer. Jürgen Bay is one of my favorites. Lots of great industrial design, high-end, good quality work, not just this kind of stuff. The do-hit chair. I think this is a funny idea. You get given this box of metal, and you have to make it your own shape as a chair. So it's kind of about self-authorship to an extent, and also it's also silly and absurd, right? It's got a dry sense of humour. It's very Dutch. And this chap on the right has just made his own chair and looks very, very tired, but also kind of happy. Yes, it is dangerous. The knotted chair by Marcel Wanders. I think this is a great idea personally. Macrame knotting of a form held over a kids don't give it to a child. Held over a form, right? So there's this whole form built, holds this in tension in the right position, dipped in glue, taken out, ends up staying a chair. Marcel Wanders, again, I really inspired by his work when I was at your stage of my career. I think his later work is kind of a bit crap, but that's each to their own, right? We're going to look at a couple of others. These are not DROOG designers from this point on. They're just other rando designers who I think are quite interesting and kind of in that area. Again, we're looking at kind of art design, edition pieces, but also the Campana brothers also do high-end luxury pieces as well. This one reminds you of Sagrada Familia, Ibrahim. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see that in some of the structure for sure. So this is a Fafella chair, 1991. You could probably get away with calling it that more than you could do now because it's a little bit crass, to be honest, but obviously made up of lots of bits of timber. They've done lots of crazy stuff. The bone chair, Joris Larman, algorithmically generated piece of furniture. So this was, yeah, this is such a cool piece of furniture. Additive manufacturing, using algorithms to determine where the strength of the object should be. Yeah, it's a generative design approach. If you look up this, you'll see the process. There's loads of iterations of this before they get to this outcome. It's got this, it's obvious why it's called a bone chair, right? Gorgeous. It is a bit Lovegrovey, you're right. The Cinderella table, Giro and Verhoeven, taking your traditional sort of, you can see the sort of outline here and doing funky things in CAD with it. These incorrect sweeps, CNC layers, putting it all together and making this. So, yeah, it's put out in front of it. That's 2009, I believe. I can't tell you for exactly. It might be 2006. Again, apologies for the formatting errors. So what we're looking at here is, I know we're really over time now, so I do apologize. I just want to show you, oh man, it's far too far back. Just remember, Konstantin GRCIC, how you pronounce it, his piece where it's kind of CAD influenced, and how far it's come in 5 years to not being CAD influenced, but CAD made. Like, you can't do this without CAD. Or you might be able to if you're some sort of genius. And Nendo, who I think is an awesome Canadian-based Japanese designer. That image on the right has been skewed, so that's not quite in proportion. Apologies. The chair on the left, I think, is just awesome. 21400 mil chair, which is the amount of rebar being used in it. Nendo also did this amazing lamp, which inspired me when I was doing my master's, made of bimetallic metal. Yeah, so obviously one part expands faster than the other, like you use in thermostats, as a lamp shade. So as the bulb heats up, it opens up. As the bulb closes or gets cooler, it closes. Wonderful. But Nendo, or Okisato or Okasati, I can't remember his name, but he's professionally known as Nendo. Amazing designer, and there's so many pieces. I just wanted to choose a big range of things in one slide. So he did these chocolate pieces, and I think there's something very interesting about these chocolate pieces, especially considering the semiotics we were talking about as well. How do these things look to taste rather than just taste to taste, right? But there's also some research behind it about how textures inform the flavor of chocolate. And then this 1010 watch, very high-end watch. I realize I have been going, actually, it's only been about an hour and 3 minutes, so I'm not too far over time, but I am over time, so I do apologize. If there is anyone in that slideshow, in that lecture that has inspired you, I urge you to go and look them up. Not just I can go, oh, that was interesting. And that'll inform your design work, okay? So these are people who are inspirational, not just to me, but to design in general. There's a few of my personal heroes in there. And there's also a few in the last lecture, who are also my personal heroes. Is there anything anyone wants to ask at this point? I know that we're all dashing off to our next thing now, but anything that's come up? Okay, final thing. We're all training to be industrial or product design engineers. Some of these pieces are in here to show you the pathway of design and not just design for design's sake, okay? Some of this more arty stuff is just more arty and addition-y, okay? It depends on your name, I suppose. There's quite a few design art galleries out there, Gallery Creo, David Gill. If you look up design art in Miami, Basel, it is basically a collector's show. And you know how art is basically a big collector's thing? Design has become the same thing now. There's a lot of design art edition pieces. Okay, just a really interesting development for me. Thanks, everyone.